Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's Evernym webinar all about getting started with self-sovereign identity. The conversation today is going to apply to any organization or sector, be that finance or insurance or government or even startups. But today we'll be using examples from higher education to bring things to life. If you'd like to delve a little bit deeper into self-sovereign identity, then do check out our Evernym resources page. That's at evernym.com/resources. And there's a fantastic set of papers and videos covering everything from the basics of SSI through to the impacts on specific sectors like financial services and higher education. So my name is Jamie Smith, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. I've been at Evernym around 2 years, and I focus on business development, but also building new ecosystems around SSI. I'm responsible for our work across higher education, and we'll touch on that later. I'm delighted today to be joined by Evernym's Chief Trust Officer, Drummond Reid. How are you doing, Drummond?
Excellent, Jamie. Super glad to be here.
Great. We'll touch on kind of Drummond's role at Evernym and a bit more about that later in the webinar. So we've got a packed agenda for you. Firstly, I'm going to give a very short refresher on SSI and why it's different to existing identity approaches. I'm then going to talk through a day in the life with self-sovereign identity, crossing contexts and an example day for a student with a digital wallet. After that, we're going to discuss where SSI really makes a difference, where SSI might fit in your organization and how use cases can really shine. And I'm very excited about the following part, which is a fireside chat with our very own Drummond Reid. We're going to be talking about things like interoperability and why and how organizations can trust SSI. We'll discuss how to get started and what the first 90 days might look like. And then we're going to open up to probably the richest and broadest bit, the Q&A. So if you do have any questions as we go through today's session, please use the Q&A facility in Zoom, and we'll be capturing questions as they come up. We'll cover as many as we can throughout the webinar, and we'll capture them. We'll pick them up at the end of the webinar. We are recording this, and we'll make it available shortly after. So let's jump in. So if you take a step back from all the excitement in the digital economy, you'll see that trusting our digital tools and our digital networks is becoming increasingly important to business, to governments, and to citizens. And we've had so many different ways of handling digital data, identity, but for at least 3 decades, we've found it difficult to answer a couple of questions. One, how do we really trust our digital connections? Are they secure? Who else is listening? And second, who's on the other end of my connection? Is it the person or the business I think it is? Or is it a bot? Or is it some other actor or someone with malicious intent? And I'd say so far, we've been handling kind of poor identity with more identity. We've asked for more and more information, and it's becoming cumbersome. The processes are broken, the experiences are terrible. But there's been a breakthrough. We've discovered a new way to move and prove digital data. And it works so that organizations can trust the data they receive from individuals, and individuals can trust the data they're getting from organizations. And both can communicate in a new, secure, and private way. And best of all, it's completely open. Nobody owns it, and anyone can use it. And we think it has the potential to scale like nothing we've seen before. Many are calling this self-sovereign identity, or SSI. It has the potential to really transform many of our digital interactions. And so let's have a very short conversation about how it works and what some of the basics are. At its very, very simplest, SSI is about having digital copies of the paper credentials we're already given every day. But these new digital credentials, they have superpowers. You can present them anywhere to anyone at any time, and they can be verified instantly. But because they're digital, we can do clever things. Not only can we back them up, but we can share only the data that's needed. So I could share that I live in country X without sharing my specific address. Or I could share that my salary is above Y, but not the actual specific amount. And it applies to just about anything: financial data, library cards, account logins, shopping receipts, utility bills, even your driving license. And why is that? Why is this new approach helpful? Well, you can use these credentials anywhere, like I said, and be instantly verified. But it can all be done with one tap. So that for a student, that might be on campus, at the library or in the gym, or even enrolling for a course remotely. For a customer, it could be logging in online or calling a contact center. And when you move home, you could let 40 different companies know your new address, all with one tap. You could even open a bank account in less than a minute. So we have these new, very frictionless, seamless, amazing customer experiences, but also providing very, very high levels of security that we've not been able to have the both before. No more usernames and passwords, and you can get multi-factor authentication built in kind of by default. And every digital relationship is unique, private, and secure. Well, how is that possible? If you strip it back, we think there are three kind of simple capabilities that you need all three to bring it together. So the first is secure digital connections. And the old way we do things, the way we do things today, is we have a connection broker. They manage our relationships. And they sit in the middle and they help us prove who we are to others. Things like social login and a role of identity providers, they help us assert who we are. But firstly, those organizations can turn us off. They can decide that we're not able to do that anymore. And secondly, those organizations are in the middle. So they can listen into the conversation and potentially the data that we're sharing. But there's a new way. And that new way is to have a private, secure, peer-to-peer relationship, a kind of peer-to-peer connection that's direct. There's no other organizations involved and no one's listening. So these secure connections enable trusted communications. And that's kind of the first core component. The second, you might call data watermarking. So it's the technology behind verifiable credentials. And data watermarking gives the data kind of cryptographic superpowers so that anyone could verify the authenticity of data. And it means that anyone receiving this watermark data, they can check, well, who issued it? Was it given only to the person sharing it? Has it been tampered with? And has it been revoked? And anyone can do this anywhere at any time. Well, how is that possible? Well, that's where capability number 3 kicks in. So having a trusted public key directory, and that means the watermark data can be verified. So we're going to have to hold the public keys of the issuers somewhere. And we believe in a healthy digital economy, that place needs to be trusted. So who's running that directory? You don't want just one organization who could shut it down either accidentally or maliciously. You want it to be secure, so it's tamper-proof and we know the data has not been changed. And we know it's ordered, so the data has been chronologically placed there. And these are the characteristics of the distributed ledgers. So putting these three things together is what makes SSI so powerful. And really, we've had these components for a while, some cases decades, but it's bringing them together in this new way creates quite new powerful capabilities. So new secure connections and data watermarking gives us private data exchange. And adding a trusted tamper-proof public key directory means we can be certain where the data's come from. So verifiable connections means we know we've got the right connection, and verifiable data means we know who issued it. So that's bringing the three together gives us this new powerful self-sovereign identity landscape. So of course, we don't want any new identity solution to be run by one company or even one industry or even one geography. We want to avoid vendor lock-in so that anyone can participate. So we believe it's going to be based on open standards. And this means that everyone can choose their own SSI provider or even build the tools themselves if they wish. And it means the system can't be turned off, just like the internet. It's why at Evernym we're very passionate about open standards, open source, and we're working with self-sovereign identity leaders and pioneers around the world, especially at the W3C, on two specific standards. One is the Decentralized Identifier Standard, or DIDS, and the other is verifiable credentials. And maybe Drummond will touch on that later in the fireside chat or in the Q&A. And the second part is about open source. So, this is the bedrock of making sure that self-sovereign identity technology can be trustworthy. And we're working really hard on the open source parts of the community and the libraries within the Hyperledger project. So that's within the Linux Foundation. So there's several projects worth checking out. Hyperledger Indie, which is all about the ledgers and decentralized identifiers. Hyperledger Aries is about digital wallets and agents. And Hyperledger Ursa is where the library for all the clever cryptography. So we can do things like, instead of asking for the data, we can ask questions of the data. So don't tell me you're 18, tell me that you're born before or after a certain date. It's a yes or a no. So I want to talk a bit about what it might feel like if you're using these SSI tools. What's it going to be like day to day with one of these devices? So I'm going to talk you through the life of a student and two specific experiences. Now, these are about a student, but they could easily apply to a customer or an employee. So meet Laura. She's a student and she's coming up to the end of her first semester at college. So the first story is going to be about her setting things up at the beginning of term. She registered with the university as normal. She had a number of face-to-face meetings, and she received a plastic student ID, just like normal. But she also downloaded a new university mobile app, which has become her digital wallet for her time while she's studying. Now, when she arrived on campus, she created a new private peer-to-peer connection with the university. And she did that by scanning a QR code at the registration desk. So she knew it was the university. Now, the person behind the desk made sure it was her, worked out what course she was going to be on, and they were able to issue Laura with a verifiable credential to prove that she was a current student, the course she was joining, and the expiry date of her course. Now, she had friends doing the same thing and collecting their digital credentials, but they were using another student app, and it was all interoperable, so it didn't matter which app they showed up with. Laura chose the university app because she could get loyalty points for maybe activities on campus. Now, when she got back to her room, she followed some simple instructions in the app and added her passport details to the digital wallet. Now, that became quite powerful because now she had, on her phone, she had her national ID, essentially. She had her student ID, meaning she didn't have to carry those around with her anymore, and they could be backed up if she lost them. So let's skip forward to the end of the semester. So she's meeting her professor. She's completed a number of credits in her course, and she's got this face-to-face meeting. She finds out her first semester grade. She got a B, which is great. And the professor updates the system, and Laura is automatically issued credentials for her performance or for her courses using that private secure connection that she set up at the beginning of the semester. Now, with one tap, she accepts, and then the credentials are issued to her on her phone. Now, she might have her grade on there, maybe her course attendance, and the credits for the semester. Now, after this kind of tutorial, the session, she goes to a cafe and checks her email. The email client presents a QR code, which she scans with a mobile phone. Her app opens, the wallet opens and presents her a challenge that says, "Are you trying to log in?" She taps once and says yes, and the email client lets her in. So no usernames, no passwords, and the email system is allowed to, or is able to check exactly which credential she's got and which access she can be given to. Now, while she was studying, she did a kind of beginner's skydiving course, and she created a peer-to-peer connection with the skydiving club, much like she did with the university. And while Laura was checking her email, she received a secure message from the club saying, "Well done, you finished your trial. Would you like full membership?" And it's a yes or a no. Now, Laura accepts with one tap, and her digital wallet sends a secure message back to the club that's been digitally signed by her wallet. And so both ends of that connection, both Laura and the club, have a digitally auditable record of the request and the response using that same peer-to-peer connection. And then, of course, once that's in place, she then automatically receives a Skydiver Club membership credential, which is added to her wallet. So a couple of more steps. After lunch, she sees a poster in the library advertising a summer internship. Applicants must be a current student, over 21, and have at least a B for this semester's study. So Laura takes out her phone, scans the QR code on the poster, and that QR code is a connection offer and triggers a new connection and a data request for applicants. So Laura does that. She opens her digital wallet, scans the QR code, gets a connection, and she accepts. The wallet is then automatically challenged to say, would you like to share some data to apply? Laura says yes. Is she over 21? Is she currently studying? And does she have at least a B? Now with one tap, Laura shares that back. But what's brilliant is that she only needs to share a yes or a no. She doesn't share the actual data. Now that's great for Laura. She's sharing less data with a known other entity. But the internship company is receiving considerably less data for what they actually need. So that's just part of the application process she can do from a poster in a library. Finally, Laura heads to a student event in the evening. Instead of presenting a paper ticket, there's a tablet on the front desk. It's got a QR code. She scans it. Her digital wallet opens. She taps a button saying, yes, I'm happy to share the ticket, and that she's over 18. She accepts, the tablet goes green and a little over 18 symbol. She's given a wristband and heads inside. So just a couple of minutes of a story of what might be possible, but a few things I want to pull out. One, all of these journeys, all of these experiences were possible with the open source tools that are available today. Secondly, all of these different experiences in different contexts can interact with the same student wallet. Third, the existing IT infrastructure can be left in place. This isn't about ripping and replacing. This is about enhancing and extending the tools we already have to make them SSI or self-sovereign identity compatible. And thirdly, my favorite one, you could start in any of those places. You could just start with event tickets. You could just start with email login and then build use case by use case because the students already have a wallet. So that means it's not big bang. And we think that's particularly powerful. So we've covered a day in the life or some example use cases, but what makes SSI special? Well, in reality, you can do passwordless login today. You could probably do digital ticketing. You can maybe even do portable student grades, but you couldn't do it all on the same open standard technology for identity. You couldn't do it all with the same QR code connection, privacy preserving, secure sharing of digital credentials. And it's very unlikely you do it with a single business case, which might be possible with SSI across a whole ecosystem or in a student case across a campus. So I want to pick out one other thing which is really important for where SSI really shines. So, our life is fragmented. Here are the many institutions or entities that Laura has been interacting with: the university, email, the library, and large organizations are the same. They've got multiple systems, multiple IT, physical assets across multiple locations. And we end up with this kind of mishmash of IT systems and identity solutions for different groups of different organizations with different administration, security firewalls, and authorization policies. But it's very fragmented from the user's perspective because, frankly, life is fragmented. That's how it is naturally. But often the answer to solve this is, well, we need a bigger silo. We try and fix the problem by building a bigger perimeter, but it can't cover everything. And in Laura's example, we can't really bring the employer with the internship into scope. So federations can work, but it brings lots of other challenges. So, which committee gets to handle the identity policy? How do we connect all these different IT systems? And do we really want another 3-year kind of mega IT program? And that's where SSI comes into its own. Because what if the student, or what if the citizen, what if the customer was the point of integration? And that's a game changer. And we think, if you put the student or the citizen at the center of our digital life, the university issues some credentials, the student can present them to an employer, it's all peer-to-peer secure. And anyone receiving these credentials can check who issued it, was it only to the person presenting them, has it been changed or tampered with, and has it been revoked? And of course, the employer in this case can share a credential back to the student, to Laura, to say, yep, you've done your internship, and it goes on and on and on. And so really, we're putting the individual back at the center of their digital lives. And we think that's really powerful. So to summarize, SSI is changing how we think about identity and moving data around. And that's because of secure connections, verifiable credentials. It's transforming experiences. And we can move from this idea of closed identity to one of open identity, which we think is a huge opportunity for virtually every business, every sector, every domain. And it's especially valuable for existing kind of ecosystems of consortia, of supply chains, because it becomes very easy to add, take away, extend, enhance existing IT. And that means a much more secure, more private way of moving and proving data. So that's the kind of first part of our webinar today. And I'm particularly excited to say, as we move to the next part, that I'm going to be introducing Drummond Reed, and we're going to have a fireside chat. So rather than me talk through the many skills and talents and on the bullets there of Drummond's role, Drummond, why don't you spend just a minute or two introducing yourself, and then we can dig into some of the juicy questions I have ready for you.
Nice juicy questions. All right. A lot of people ask, what's the role of a chief trust officer? Well, when you're building SSI infrastructure, it means that you have to look at what is a chief security officer, chief privacy officer, chief identity officer, showing up more. You have to roll them all together and say they're all important, because ultimately it's about how do you engineer and achieve trust for our customers. And so that's what I do here. I helped one of the founding trustees of the Sovereign Foundation, which is an international nonprofit for global public utility for self-sovereign identity. And at the Sovereign Foundation, I co-chair the Governance Framework Working Group, one of my favorite topics in this area. And I'm a member of the Guardianship Working Group, which came out of a year-long task force that we did there. And then I work heavily on the specs and standards in this space that you've mentioned, Jamie, the DID spec of the W3C. I'm the co-author of that, and also work on verifiable credentials and the whole trust over IP stack.
Fantastic. I don't know how you fit it all in, Drummond. It's always always amazing. So you've been in this space for as long as anyone else in the community. So I wanted to kind of dig in to pick your brain on a couple of questions that we get a lot. And I wanted to start with, where are some of the kind of best examples in your mind of where SSI is being put to work, if you like? So what would be the use cases or examples you talk about?
Right. How's it actually working in the wild? I think there are two really good examples that we can talk about, Jamie. One is the what True is doing, TRUU, with the NHS in the UK, in your home country there. It's all about doctor ID. It's sort of the first foray into healthcare, medical care, but it's not yet about patient ID and patient records. We'll get there. It's starting with a more immediate problem. And what I love about True is it's a classic case of working from the pain point backwards. Two doctors there were observing just how much time is lost by doctors who, in the NHS system, have to, they go from hospital to hospital. It's national healthcare, and as I understand it from the True founders, the amount of administrative time that they end up taking to verify their identity, because it's critically important that it be verified as a real doctor when you go to a new hospital. 25,000 doctor days are wasted on that credential handling, HR administration per year in the NHS. So it's a huge inefficiency, and it's not just cost, it's time that they could be spending with patients. And these two doctors got so frustrated, they said, we want to solve this problem. We think we should be able to do it digitally. And they started working on this before really SSI was born. And so they recognized the need for the standards, for the software, for everything that we built. And now they have a live pilot going with NHS, where the first doctors are being issued digital credentials. There's multiple issuers involved in the creation, verification of those credentials. And the early results, they're really very happy about. So, yeah, that's I think a great example of picking a particular high pain problem for a very well-defined demographic. And I think that's, you know, there'll be lots of those examples. The other example I'd bring up is a different approach. We refer to as the ecosystem approach. And the canonical example there we refer to as ACE, the Alberta Credential Ecosystem in the province of Alberta in Canada. And in that case, what we have is not a single organization with a single problem, but a whole group of companies and organizations. It crosses finance, healthcare, government, colleges, telco up there, TELUS, and there are more that are now coming in. And what they realized, and again, there are a few visionaries involved. Mike Brown at ATB is just been fabulous in helping this all come together, and Andrew Johnson at TELUS. They recognize that the more entities, the more participants in the ecosystem, and the more credentials they could empower Alberta citizens with, the more valuable it got for everyone, right? It's classic network effect, but just within one ecosystem. So, you know, they started with ATB could provide a credential of a bank account. TELUS could provide a credential of a telephone account. The universities could provide student IDs. And they started just looking at the value exchanges of how ATB could save costs and improve customer experience with those other credentials, and how TELUS could get an automatic address change. And, you know, all the use cases you talked about with the universities. So, and it's just that network effect is already expanding there. So I think it's a really good example of how to approach it from an ecosystem standpoint. So whether it's a point problem that's a great pain point that you can solve with digital credentials, or a whole ecosystem, or anything in between, I think, you know, SSI is a broad enough solution to not just identity, but digital trust, that there are a lot of ways it can gain traction in the market.
That is really fascinating. And I love that doctor example because, you know, they didn't come with, we want to do a blockchain project. You know, they came with a specific problem that needs to be solved. And I, you know, I understand that, you know, they were technology agnostic. It's just, it's a loose ecosystem of many different organizations, different IT systems, different teams that SSI is super well suited to. And it's a great use case. Thank you. So
let me point out one more thing about that, Jamie. It was absolutely critical from NHS perspective that whatever solution they put in place had to be open standard, had to be vendor neutral, could not be proprietary in any way, because, you know, they serve a whole country, and they've been, as I understand it, burned before by, you know, by those situations. So I think it's a great example of where you really have to have the open standard solution that we've been talking about here.
Brilliant, thank you. I guess one of the questions I get a lot is about, okay, I kind of get it from a citizen's perspective, but how do I know who's on the other end? Like, how do I know that it really is the university I'm connecting with? How do I know that a doctor really is connecting with the hospital? Maybe you could talk a bit about you know, how you might answer that and what it might mean for an organization to kind of adopt this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what we're building here is trust infrastructure. So the number one question you have to be able to answer is, how can I trust it, right? And I like to talk about this whole infrastructure as it's a cryptographic layer overlaid by human trust, and what we need to do as humans and organizations to trust each other. So And you have to put the two together to actually answer that question. In your scenarios you described, you discussed the simplest and most direct way to have that happen, which is you're actually the face-to-face interaction. Like the student you mentioned, first getting her first credentials by scanning a QR code in a registration line, right, at a university. I think that will be surprisingly common. If you think about all the places we use real credentials out of our physical wallets today, and we do them face-to-face interactions, and then you just insert the QR code. And many of us, I actually keep track in when I board planes, which is a lot. And it's well, in my experience, become well over 50% of the travelers now are using QR codes of their phone. They're using mobile boarding passes, right? All our smartphones support that today. They just do it in proprietary wallets. And what we're doing with SSI is we're turning it into open standard. It can work everywhere. It's not limited to the limited set of credentials that can go in those wallets. So every physical interaction you have, it's going to be really difficult to spoof or introduce, an actor there. And the beauty of that QR code scan is as soon as you do that, you are creating a direct cryptographic connection between your wallet and the wallet of the person or organization or thing that you're scanning, right? So all those, quote, man-in-the-middle attacks, they're just gone in that interaction. Now, it becomes the next step harder, of course, if you're doing it online, right? If you're doing it at a distance over a digital network, right? And that's where most phishing attacks typically go on today. The beautiful thing there, and I've been so passionate about this, and as I'm so gratified to see the two standards we needed to solve this problem of DIDs for that trusted connection and then verifiable credentials come together. Fundamentally, the answer there is when you're going to form a connection, what you need to do on your end, what your agent and wallet needs to do is you're going to get a DID from that other party. It could come in many different ways. You could scan a QR code online. You could get it in a link and any kind of message that could deliver that link to you. But before you do anything with it, your agent will say, can I trust this DID? And the fantastic thing is we're providing multiple tools within SSI infrastructure to answer that question. One of the easiest things you could do is just go, is it on a whitelist that I can go check very easily, right? And early implementers like CU Ledger, for instance, that have created a standardized verifiable credential for the credit union industry. They're going to have a whitelist of all the credit unions out there that are issuing that credential. It's trivially easy for any verifier that wants to accept that credential to go, hey, is that from a real credit union, right? And then it gets one step richer when what you have is what we call governance frameworks that are published by those governance authorities like CU Ledger that say, here's all the ways you can check. You can check a whitelist. You could ask for a verifiable credential from the issuer, right? You get the DID and say, well, can you prove to me you're part of some governance framework that I, an individual, trust? For a student, it might be the university governance framework, right? And they can, any merchant or part of the university or related, alumni or whatever, all of them can say, hey, I'm a real legitimate part of this network. They get a verifiable credential, and now they can prove to every verifier, I really, or every student that wants to be part of that, I am a real member of that ecosystem. So I think I feel quite strongly that as we roll out this infrastructure, we will, put phishing out of business.
I love that. That's a great kind of one-liner about, we're fixing fraud and putting man-in-the-middle attacks out of business. So this speaks to me. We talk about open source, open standards. It's almost like, how do I know I can trust the org? The next question I get is, are we creating another massive walled garden? It's, it's an open standard that this group use. Are there winner takes all effects here? How does it, interop work across what potentially could be multiple silos? And I think it's kind of the ecosystem argument that we're creating more groups.
This is maybe the area of the whole emergence of SSI and what we call trust over IP, the whole infrastructure on top of it, that I feel most passionate about, because I think it was Christopher Allen who initially said, if there's lock-in of any kind, it's not self-sovereign, right? You can't actually have control of how you present your identity, and it can't be fully portable if you're locked into any one vendor, or even, as you said, into an industry or a specific ecosystem, right? You have to have interoperability, and the perfect analogies for this are the internet and the web, right? We have, not perfect, but 99% interoperability of our browsers and web servers everywhere on the web, of all of our devices on the internet, because we developed not just open standards, but open infrastructure for using all of that. And that's exactly what we need to do here. And we are well along that path. If someone had asked me 4 years ago, would we have one approved W3C standard and another that's verifiable credentials, and another one in a full working group of W3C that's well down the road, that's the DID working group, I would have been, that would have been, I wouldn't have thought it was possible to move that fast, but that's what the demand for this industry has produced. So I think the short answer to that question is, I would be stunned, even if the very largest of the internet, giants out there says, "Oh, we like this idea, but we're going to go do it in a walled garden." I don't think it can work. It's just too important to people. I mean, the example I love to use, Jamie, is if someone told me that this piece of leather, there were restrictions on what cards I could put into it and take out of it and win, I would never buy that, right? Well, that's what we need to have with self-sovereign identity, right? We need digital wallets, digital agents that can interact anywhere and be trusted everywhere. And there's only one route to do that. That is open standards, and then open source, so you can really trust the security behind it.
That is very cool. I have a bunch of other questions I want to ask, but I feel that with the time available, we could probably jump into some of the questions that have come in while we've been on. So why don't we do that, and then maybe if we've got time at the end, I'll come back to some of the others that I had lined up. So if let's have a look. So first question from Anto Budario Joe, apologies for pronunciation. Do you see applications of SSI for devices in the world of IoT?
Ooh. So I want to jump right on that one. First of all, at the Sovereign Governance Framework Working Group, we have a set of task forces. And what I love about it there is we didn't come out with a grand plan and say, well, what task forces are we going to have over the next couple of years? What we did was, as the working group attracted members, and we're over 50 people that are active in that working group now, we basically said, hey, what areas do you want to concentrate on? Where do you want to solve problems? That's where guardianship, for instance, that was the first task force that formed. They did a whole bunch of work over last year, produced an outstanding white paper, just put in sovereign guardianship, and you'll go right to that. The second task force that formed right after that was SSI and IoT. And back at that time, I was like, wow, is there really that much, demand for this? Well, it turns out that, obviously security and privacy is a big issue for IoT devices, but the really biggest issue is control, right? Devices matter because they matter to people and organizations, right? And supply chain and, home automation and autonomous cars and mobile computing. All these things are all tied to how do you tie people and organizations to those devices, provide that control, provide that accountability. So I think it's one of the hottest topics in SSI. I spoke 2 weeks ago. I was in Amsterdam for the W3C DID working group meeting there. And I spoke at a security conference hosted by KPN, the largest the telco, and they've got a division called KPN Security in the Netherlands. And they invited me to speak and talk about SSI. And what I found out was the majority of questions were about SSI and IoT. And they took me to meet with the head of KPN Security for IoT. And we talked for a half an hour about the standards they are trying to put in place for IoT devices for security. And the number one thing on his list was, how do we integrate SSI? So I think it's an enormous area of potential, and we're having a lot of those folks get involved with the DID standard because they're seeing how DIDs go down to that cryptographic layer that's needed.
Very cool.
Oh, by the way, if you're interested in that, come join the SSI and IoT task force at the Sovereign Foundation. You can just Google that and you'll come to that page.
All right, so a juicy question in from Mike Brown, I think of Alberta fame, working on the ACE program in Canada. Given all the great progress to date, especially on the standards front, what do you see as the current biggest challenge that needs to be solved to allow this to scale?
Oh, that's such a cracking, great question.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, if we had Mike on here, we'd all ask him that question because he is living it right there. So, Jamie, I'll provide my answer, but I'm curious on yours. As folks know that have listened to me on other casts, we are getting the technical infrastructure in place, and I don't want to imply that it's all done, but the basic stack that we need is up and operating, and we are progressing on what's needed at that blockchain public ledger layer, the more advanced features there, the interoperability of the agents and wallets at layer 2, and the interoperability of verifiable credentials. The layer that needs the most maturing now is the 4th layer of governance frameworks. And we need to start saying, okay, we have this technology. How do we go and start creating interoperable trust networks and ecosystems? And that's, I guess the really good news there is that's not a technology problem, that's a people problem, right? That's a policy problem. That's how do you get people to collaborate and do so efficiently so that they can start taking advantage of the technology we've created. That, of course, can go at the speed that people can go, not the speed that bits and developers can go. But I think if we keep the two going in parallel, we're going to start getting to more and more real value. And that's the second thing I'd say is the number one thing that I find makes a difference is being able to show the value, right? Every time you can show, here is how this community went, and that's why we love to talk about Mike and the Alberta credential ecosystem, because they are showing the value. And as that network effect kicks in, I think we'll see less and less of that and more about how do we go solve this point problem. There is one third thing, actually, as we're going down this. A lot of places are saying, hey, the problems we want to solve, we want to make sure that this will satisfy regulation, satisfy regulators. A good example there is KYC in financial services, know your customer. There are a lot of financial institutions that see SSI and verifiable credentials. Oh my gosh, this could potentially save us millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in KYC, but will the regulators accept it? So I think we need to be working on educating the regulators and bringing them the examples so that they will, ultimately bless this and all of us can realize the benefits.
Before we get to the next question, I'm going to add that I think this shift from proof of concept to proof of value, I think there's a growing acceptance that the technology kind of works. There are some gaps, there's some things that are still being worked on and improved, but the basics are there. We know it works, and the opportunity to really show where the value is and write the business case against it. I think that's going to be one of the biggest milestones to say, here's our use case. It's saving us X for Y. And that data, that is starting to come in now. People are starting to use it, put real credentials in front of real users, and we're starting to be able to measure it. So I think that's one of the kind of biggest next challenges for us, is to be able to articulate concisely the kind of business case, the ROI, if you like, and how it fits into a longer term vision. I am going to take one more question, and then I'm going to jump back to kind of what next 90 days might look like. So, or your first 90 days might look like. So I'm going to say, so how do the 3 pillars of Evernym relate to the 10 principles of SSI by Christopher Allen in 2016? So is there a clear mapping? So of these trusted digital connections, verifiable credentials, or the data watermarking, and a trusted public key directory. and how does that fit with Christopher Allen's 10 principles? You've been on this journey, and there's many principles documents that have been put out over the last probably 20 years. But Drummond, what's your view on how these fit?
Yeah, I love this question because Christopher Allen is a member of the DID working group at W3C, and I was with him, actually gave several talks with him in Amsterdam 2 weeks ago. And we talked about, he's actually going to be evolving the principles based on feedback. The first answer is it's actually apples and oranges. The three pillars that we talked about there are basically the three components you put together to create SSI infrastructure that helps implement those 10 principles. So I would say they're aligned. It's that infrastructure, those three pillars of what comes together to do that helps you, implement every one. And they start with self-sovereignty. Well, self-sovereignty is also core principle number one of the sovereign governance framework. So realizing that and things like guardianship and control and portability, that's what those three pillars, it's like they're the seat of the stool, and the three pillars are what hold this stool up.
That's great. We've got a couple more questions that have come in, but I do want to jump to, what might getting started feel like? So let me run through a bit of that, and then maybe we'll come to a couple of questions at the end. So first of all, thank you, Drummond, for that. It's always great to be able to kind of dip into some of the details and pick your brain on some of the hot topics. So I'd say one of the most frequent questions we get at Evernym is, well, what does starting look like? What can I do? What should I do first? And so I thought I'd just kind of tackle a couple of those main points. So first, we've got over 70 projects now around the world, across 20 plus sectors, a whole wide range of use cases, and all of whom are in various stages of demo, POC, business case, governance frameworks. I wanted to talk about what the first kind of 90 days might look like. So, the first thing to say is this is about acceleration. I think there's so much learning going on around the world, technically, around business, the regulatory aspects, that we can see across all of that and bring it together. And so we're helping organizations of every size kind of speed up, not just with the tech and being at the cutting edge of what's being developed, but also the learning from other projects. And so it's every size, companies of every size, every sector, we're able to kind of sew them together. And it's about learning by doing. We think putting real credentials in people's hands is where rubber's going to hit the road. We're going to do the most learning about user experience, business case, and the policy impacts. It's about reducing time to production and aligning with existing initiatives and what's already been learned. So what might the first 90 days look like? Well, it's about getting tools into your hands as organizations. And we think building fast demos is incredibly helpful to share with colleagues, stakeholders, maybe someone in finance who's signing off the next phase, to explain how SSI feels and works. So it's about mapping the first use cases in the first 30 days. We don't start with the tech. We start with who's sharing what data for what purpose, what are the policy implications, what do we need to understand about that context? Is it face-to-face or otherwise? And what data is being shared? Sometimes we'll actually join you on site for 3 days to do technical setup and get the initial capabilities set up. But once those are in place, then it's about navigating the many resources that are available. There's so much material coming out now. It's about kind of orientation and discovery, learning about what the use case is, learning about what the technical requirements are and the policy implications. And in many cases, we connect our customers or the people in this first phase with others at the same stage. How does KYC work? Are we including biometrics? Does it need to be face-to-face? Do we have our own app or is it another one? In the following 30 days, really that's about moving to POC, proof of concept. And that's mapping that whole end-to-end journey, understanding all the requirements for the touch points, maybe with existing IT, mapping some data policies and what governance might be required, And my specialist bit is about that business case. So, are we saving time? Are we making a much better customer experience? Is it about reducing fraud? Is it uplifting revenue? Mapping that out and understanding what the business opportunity is. And then really by 90 days, and this is, it's aggressive, but we think this is an exciting way to kind of start the SSI journey, is to really try and get back to pilot within that 90 days. So with the right development resource, with the right support from us, real credentials and with real people using real SSI tools. And as part of that, that last sprint, if you like, it's nailing down that governance and policy changes, not having all the answers, but just mapping out what we think the impacts will be. And then being able to articulate and sketch the business case. How many people might be doing these new things in this new way? What does that mean? And then mapping out a plan to kind of scale implementation. So from our perspective, that's really the kind of first 90 days if you wanted to really go fast at it. And we're seeing increasing number of kind of small, agile companies who are able to move quickly, and that's it's really exciting. And we're helping some of our larger companies make some of that same progress. It's worth saying that there is an opportunity to get started. I mean, this is kind of how Evernym's in this business. We're unapologetically about making progress and helping companies build SSI into their business. So there are plans available. Just get in touch if that's of interest. But let's maybe jump back to another kind of 5 or 10 minutes on some other questions that have come in. I'd say the next juicy one is one that's come in from Vic Cooper. Even though it's called SSI with the emphasis on identity, isn't the real underlying value the DIDCOM channel? So why don't I have a swing at that, and then maybe Drum, you can hand it back. And I've been kind of looking at I'd say not specifically identity, but data sharing, privacy, and trust for many years now. And this new pairwise, secure, peer-to-peer channel is going to become a new fabric of how information is going to move around. And I would argue that identity is one of the things we'll do over it, moving credentials around. But it's going to open up entirely new waves of operating models, customer experiences, because we can message customers in new ways, and not just message them like a push notification. A cryptographically signed message back saying, yes, I accept, or yes, I'm here. And that can really serve incredibly, serve to address fraud, reduce costs. And of course, messaging in all its flavors will get increasingly rich over time. Right now, it's kind of structured messages, but in the fullness of time, that's going to really broaden out. Maybe Drum, you want to talk about agent-to-agent messaging and kind of where we think that might go?
Oh, that's an incredibly rich topic. I talked about the 4 layers of what we call the trust over IP stack, the blockchain or public ledger layer. Layer 2 is the DIDCOM protocol, and that is the crux of interoperability between digital wallets, digital agents everywhere, right? It is the core protocol for how you establish connection, and then how you will exchange verifiable credentials or any other messaging, secure messaging between secure and private between those agents. That's in internet protocol architecture, that's called the thin waist. And Vic's absolutely right that the thin waist is the heart of what makes everything work. What it will do is build a whole platform for, again, secure private agent-to-agent messaging, of which verifiable credentials and the governance frameworks for them are just the base layer. Now it's like, what else can you do with those agents? What are the problems? Secure messaging, verifiable data exchange, automation of business processes across trust boundaries. It's it's going to be a very broad new industry, and Vic's absolutely right. For folks that are interested in looking at that stack, we can share the link. There is a Hyperledger's RFC about the trust over IP stack, and you can read more about that role of layer 2.
Very good. We've got about at least 3 or 4 questions about commercials and making money. So maybe I'll try and cover them in one go. So One is how will companies monetize SSI as an issuer, verifier, or becoming an agent in the DID layer? That's from Tamer Udvitman. One is in SSI, who will own the cost of the SSI ecosystem? For example, education use case, is university own the infrastructure? That's from Kalmesh Nagwer. And there's another one about how do you make money if it's all interoperable and decentralized? And that's from Jimmy Dorsey. Drummond, do you want to have a go at where we think the value is being created and therefore where some of the costs will show up? And then maybe I can touch on some of the business case.
Sure. So it is an extremely good question. And I'll point out the third task force to self-organize in the Sovereign Governance Framework is called the Business of SSI Task Force. And it's got about a dozen folks that are working together on a white paper that should be out by the end of Q1, analyzing the business case or cases. And I was just on, I don't spend, I can't be a member of all those task forces, but I did join the last call of that group. And the key thing they're emphasizing is there's a whole bunch of value. It's a little bit like analyzing the business case for the web, right? There's just so many different ways in which it adds value. So what they're doing is they're compartmentalizing it. I think there's 6 major areas where they're saying value is being added. And each of those can have, you can build businesses on top or any combination. I saw on the question, another question come, well, if all this is, free, open source, open standard, how does a company like Evernym make money? And a simple, very high level answer to that is, hey, so is Linux, right? And yet Red Hat built a very, very valuable company that eventually IBM bought by being the premier vendor to build value add on what became, one of the most important technology stacks out there. We believe the same thing is going to be true of SSI and the trust over IP stack. And Evernym's goal is to just build a great company around serving, primarily enterprise customers all the way up to government, saying, if you really want to use this stack effectively and build effective solutions on it, we can partner with you and help you do that, even though the underlying technology is open source.
And let me touch on the, what's in it for other organizations. And I think there's probably the easier answer, several answers, but the easier end is, where's the value in SSI? Well, it's going to be great customer experiences. It's going to be lower cost. Arguably, those better relationships are going to drive potentially new revenues, more efficiency. There's a reg tech kind of compliance angle here. So I think almost the business problems that exist today, there are attracting money and budgets today to solve them. This is where this will attach itself. If there's a $10 million budget to improve onboarding in an organization, this could go there. If there's a $10 million budget to improve compliance, security, privacy, this can go there. If there is a customer acquisition budget, if I've got an existing connection with a business, and then I want to be cross-sold to another product or service, this is going to create entirely new customer experiences and customer acquisition strategies. So I think there's a really interesting place of attaching it to traditional business, but at the same time, there's going to be, I think, new business models and new operating models, both for service providers who are enabling SSI tech to exist, frankly, the existing integrators and those who are building middleware and running IT for businesses. The big SIs, they're going to be really interested in new digital transformation programs based on SSI. And that's before you get to the kind of medium longer term where when data is issued, we can start to understand who's issuing it and why, under what circumstances they issued. And there are, there's research projects at the moment looking at how you might remunerate the issuers for issuing credentials, much of which is in the paper that Sovereign put out in 2016. So I think there's, frankly, a very wide range of opportunities. It depends on the use case, depends on the organization, depends on the commercial model. But I think there's kind of existing money, if you like, things we do today that we can improve. And then there's new business models and revenue models that will emerge. whether it's through communications or credential exchange. I think with that, we're probably at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for so many of you staying with us. I'm probably going to wrap it up at this point. But Drummond, I want to say thank you so much to you for making the time and allowing us to ask some of those pointy questions and really draw on your expertise. So thank you very much. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us, whether it's first thing in the morning or last thing at night. We really appreciate it. There's many more of these webinars. You can go to evernym.com/resources. And as I said, there's papers, there's other webinars on content, whether it's what happens if I lose my phone? What is this going to do for banks? What's the basics of SSI? So with that, we'll close. I really appreciate your time and thanks again so much. And we'll catch you next time. Goodbye.
Yep. Thanks very much, Jamie. I've been trying to answer questions in the Q&A list for some people individually as well. If you run out of time, feel free to contact us directly and we will try and make sure your question gets answered.
Absolutely. And we will we'll be following up with answers to all the questions that we didn't have time to cover just now. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you next time.